Welcome to episode 369 of the Genuine ScLoHo Media and Marketing Podcast. My name is Scott Howard, also known as ScLoHo. This is an ongoing collection of media, marketing, and personal insights with a fresh update nearly every week since 2017. This is the audio reading of an article that you can read at my website at scotthoward.me. Altogether, I published over 1,600 articles, and this one is titled The Value of Radio Ratings. Even though I'm recording this at the Federated Media Studios in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I work for ScLoHo Radio, and this is being promoted by my employer, everything that I say or write is strictly my own thoughts and not necessarily the opinions of Federated Media or any of their affiliations and or advertisers. Twice a year, the international recognized research company Nielsen does a deep dive into radio listenership in the Fort Wayne, Indiana metropolitan area. And then legitimate radio station companies and advertising agencies can purchase access to those results. The part of Nielsen that measures radio is actually named Nielsen Audio, which was created in 2012 when they purchased Arbitron, whose company roots go back to the 1950s. In the couple of decades that I've worked in radio advertising in Fort Wayne, I've worked for 3 different radio station groups that have used Arbitron, and now Nielsen, and also Eastland Ratings. When I joined ScLoHo and Federated Media in 2013, they had been an Eastland subscriber, not Nielsen. Around 10 years later, Federated Media switched back to Nielsen, and that's when Eastland stopped servicing Fort Wayne. I place limited credibility on any of the rating services, but they are a valuable as a resource if you have an understanding of the limitations of the data that they provide. Most rating data for radio stations is done via a survey. Nielsen surveys 294 radio markets, and 246 of them are recorded by participants manually logging what they listen to, either in a paper survey or a digital format. However, the top 48 largest markets use a bit of technology called a personal people meter, or PPM. They receive encoded signals from radio stations that log that information for you. PPMs debuted in 2007, and by 2010, they were being used in all 48 radio markets that are using them today. Now, a new change for 2025 is that this year PPMs will be lowering the threshold from 5 minutes to 3 minutes. Let me explain. Traditionally, if a person listens for at least 5 minutes of a quarter hour to a particular radio station, that radio station would get credit for the entire 15 minutes. This year, instead of it taking 5 minutes, it only takes 3 minutes of continuous listening to count. Now, some of the basic information is gathered by these surveys include age and gender of the respondents along with their addresses. Additional information that we get from Nielsen includes income, spending habits, household size, and a whole host of data that includes research from affiliated research companies like Scarborough that can give us a pretty cool picture of the people, their habits, and lifestyles on a local level, along with their radio listening habits. Now, there is also a danger in placing too much credence in the results of any one survey, but I take a look at trends to see the trends. So, as it's also true with all polls, these surveys use a sample size of the entire population that represent the entire listening area. So instead of getting all 500,000 people in a city to participate in their survey, they take a representative sample of a couple thousand people and then expand or multiply it to fit the criteria of the overall population. So, here's the local data that I use from our radio ratings surveys. Number 1, CUME. That's short for cumulative. That is the total number of listeners that each person, with each person counted once. Let me explain that again. CUME. It's short for cumulative. It's a total number of listeners with each person being counted just one time. Number 2 is AQH, which is average quarter-hour persons. This is the average number of listeners listening per 15 minutes. except you only have to listen to 5 minutes within a quarter hour, which is what's switching to 3 minutes later this year. And then number 3, rating points. This is average quarter-hour rating. The average quarter-hour person's estimate expressed as a percentage of the population being measured. The formula that they use for this is the AQH persons divided by the population times 100 equals the AQH rating as a percent. Now, that last number is what is publicly released online, and anyone with an internet connection can get it free. Now, the problem I have with using it by itself is it's the end result of a math formula, and the numbers used to get that end result are more important than the final number. Let me demystify what I just said. If I spent $100 on lunch today, and Jimmy spent $200 on lunch today, what can you conclude except that Jimmy spent twice as much money? See, maybe I fed 10 people at the cost of $10 each at a fast food place. Or maybe I bought $100 worth of groceries and prepared it and served it to 35 people. And Jimmy, perhaps he took a different way of spending his $200. Maybe he took a client out for lunch at a decent restaurant, and lunch for two, including tip, was $100 or $200. See how hard it is to measure the value of money unless you have a deeper understanding? Similar story with the ratings that radio and TV outlets get. A ratings point is not the best way to determine the value unless you know the background information and the details of that formula. Now, there's also one more bit of information that I pull from the radio rating surveys that is very useful, and that's called TSL. TSL stands for time spent listening. It's an average length of time that a person is listening to a radio station. I'll have more on this in the next few weeks, including a deep dive into the latest ratings release for Fort Wayne radio stations and another article on how to do common sense radio advertising. This was a type of schedule buying that I learned when I worked in Detroit, when I worked for a radio station that didn't subscribe to ratings. However, there is one more critical element to always remember, no matter what kind of advertising you're considering, and that is this. All of these numbers are measurements of people's media habits, but they are not measurements of their actual buying. Even more critical is to remember that it's impossible to know for sure what ad exposure was the one that created the person to buy. More on that later this year, too. If you have any questions about advertising or marketing that you don't know who to ask, feel free to ask me. Just drop me an email to scott@WOWO.com.
Podcasts by Federated Media.